U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un before the end of the year, as Pyongyang's emphasis on the two leaders' personal ties leaves the door open to renewed diplomacy. President Kim Jong-un has praised U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to scale back joint military drills, calling it a meaningful step toward creating conditions for dialogue and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Also on Thursday, President Yi met with China's top diplomat Wang Yi in Seoul, calling for closer strategic communication with Beijing on bilateral ties and issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula. We begin with North Korea's latest missile launch. South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff says the North fired around 10 short-range ballistic missiles from the regime's capital region toward the East Sea at around 5 p.m. on Thursday. Now, the missiles flew around 300 kilometers, with South Korean and U.S. authorities are now analyzing their exact specifications. The National Security Office convened an emergency security meeting to assess the launch's impact on South Korea's national security and ordered necessary measures while calling for a heightened readiness. It also condemned the launch as a serious violation of UN Security Council resolutions and urged Pyongyang to immediately halt. Now, Thursday's launch comes amid the ongoing South Korea-U.S. joint military exercise, which ends Friday, and making it the 12th such launch this year. Now, in the meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump is once again signaling his willingness to resume talks with North Korea. And as a prospect of another Trump-Kit summit draw attention, Trump has also made a rare reference to the size of Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal. Our defense correspondent Park Kwon reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he'll be meeting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un later this year. The remarks came while speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday local time, and just days after ordering the Department of War to scale back the ongoing Uchi Freedom Shield exercise with South Korea, a move seen as an overture to Pyongyang. The Wall Street Journal previously reported that Trump has instructed his aides to pursue a meeting with Kim as soon as this fall, raising speculation that the two could meet around the APEC summit in China this November. Trump also made a public reference to the size of North Korea's nuclear arsenal.
He has 57 very powerful nuclear weapons. Should have never allowed it to happen. They should have never allowed it. If I were president, I wouldn't have allowed it.
One expert says such remarks disclosing an exact figure are unprecedented.
It's extremely rare for a president to publicly state how many nuclear weapons the North possesses. Trump may be trying to show U.S. voters how urgent the North Korean nuclear issue is and why he believes another summit with Kim Jong-un is necessary.
The professor also raised concerns that this could shift the focus of future U.S.-North Korea talks from denuclearization to arms control, potentially suggesting Washington is treating Pyongyang as a de facto nuclear armed regime. On the local front, Trump's figure differs from an estimate cited by South Korean Defense Minister An Gyubek during a parliamentary session on Thursday. An said private research groups estimate North Korea could possess between 80 and 120 nuclear weapons.
It's difficult to give an exact figure. I don't think it would be appropriate for me, as South Korea's defense minister, to comment on the U.S. estimate of around 57.
But when asked whether Seoul recognizes Pyongyang as being nuclear armed, An said he cannot officially do so, calling it instead a matter of being strategically prepared for all possibilities. The South Korean government has maintained its position and has refrained from publicly discussing such details. A Defense Ministry official reaffirmed Thursday Seoul's position that it cannot allow North Korea to have possession of nuclear weapons. Park Kwon, Arirang News.
Now, before today's missile launch, North Korea broke its silence on President Trump's latest overtures, acknowledging his personal ties with Kim Jong-un while casting doubt on any recent communication between the two leaders. Kim Do-yeon has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump sent a series of comments and claims in an effort to reach out to North Korea, which also prompted a response in what analysts now see as a phase of testing the waters between both sides. North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, shared a message through state-run media Korean Central News Agency at 10 p.m. Wednesday, dismissing Washington's decision to scale back joint military exercises and denying direct communication between its leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. However, the message's timing has grabbed attention.
That shows Pyongyang sees this as a sensitive issue and intends to manage the message actively and quickly. Responding at 10 p.m., right as the details were coming out of the U.S. side, shows a strong intent to actively manage the message.
While Kim Jong-un claimed the regime feels no interest in temporary drill reduction, saying Pyongyang will not respond if Washington attempts to frame the scale-back exercises as a goodwill gesture, she emphasized the North Korean leader still maintains good memories and feelings toward Trump personally.
This isn't a direct refusal to talk. I think it's Pyongyang maintaining ambiguity around the two leaders' personal ties, while pressing Washington to come forward with a firmer, more concrete commitment to end its hostile policy toward the North.
Analysts say North Korea is holding out for substantial policy shifts before agreeing to formal negotiations. Meanwhile, South Korea's unification ministry urged the regime to engage, noting that Trump's decision aims to initiate dialogue and promote peace. A ministry official stressed that ending the war and establishing peace on the Korean peninsula must be prioritized above all else. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
While Trump's push for talks with Kim Jong-un continues, President Lee Jae-myung has welcomed Trump's move to scale back joint military drills, praising it as a bold step toward renewed dialogue with North Korea and peace on the Korean peninsula. Yoon Jung-min has more.
Citing President Trump's recent social media posts, President Lee Jae-myung said he agrees with the U.S. leaders' will and efforts to build peace on the Korean peninsula, even at the cost of scaling down the annual Seoul-Washington combined defense drills. On social media on Wednesday, Lee called it a big decision to move beyond hostility and said he respected the U.S. president's efforts to create an environment to resume dialogue with North Korea. The South Korean president hoped for trust building and a resumption of talks between North Korea and the U.S., reiterating to take on the role of a pacemaker, while Trump plays the role of a peacemaker. He added that he hoped to meet with his American counterpart in the near future. He also said he fully agreed with Trump that Seoul should be responsible for its own defense, comments he often revisits, adding that the country is ranked 5th in global military power and that it aims to increase defense spending to 3.5% of its GDP.
동맹이 굳건해야 안보의 근간이 더 튼튼해질 것이고 또 우리 자신의 힘을 키워야 동맹으로서의 가치와 필요성도 더 커지게 됩니다.
On the efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the South Korean leader noted that the country will continue to communicate closely with the U.S. and review its contribution within the purview of domestic law. Trump has accused South Korea of not joining action against Iran. The main opposition People Power Party criticized President Lee's comments on the reduction of the joint drill as a, quote, psychological victory, arguing that the Iran war and a delay in U.S. investment are the main factors. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also here in Seoul, China's top diplomat is in South Korea and has met President Lee Jae-myung following his talks with Foreign Minister Jo Hyun on bilateral ties and North Korea. Our Oh Seung has the details of their meeting.
President Lee Jae-myung met with China's top diplomat Wang Yi on Thursday, calling for strategic communication as Seoul and Beijing seek ways to fully restore bilateral ties and as Lee calls for a peace regime with Pyongyang. The meeting took place in the morning, according to the Blue House's press release, with President Lee conveying his warm regards to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Lauding progress made in the improvement of bilateral relations, he asked Wang to maintain close strategic communication with Foreign Minister Jo Hyun and National Security Advisor Wi Song-lak on Korea-China relations, the Korean Peninsula and other issues. This came after the Chinese official talks with Foreign Minister Jo Hyun on Wednesday. Over their 4-hour talks and official dinner, the two diplomats discussed affairs on the Korean Peninsula, with Cho requesting China's constructive role in securing Pyongyang's return to talks.
As much as President Lee Jae-myung presented a blueprint for peaceful coexistence on the Korean Peninsula in his recent Liberation Day address, the government will continue working toward the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the achievement of peace.
According to Seoul officials, Wang said China's policy remained consistent and pledged to keep playing a constructive role in promoting peace and stability.
We also hope that South Korea and North Korea can gradually move along the path towards peace and coexistence, and sincerely wish for the continued stability and development of the Korean Peninsula.
The Chinese minister, however, did not mention denuclearization. As Wang left his meeting, he told the media that renewed dialogue was a matter for the United States and North Korea to decide. He put the onus on Washington, saying it must change its long-standing hostile policy towards North Korea. This highlights lingering differences between Seoul and Beijing amid a deepening US-China rivalry over regional security and technology. Still, both sides have sought to rebuild cooperation, seeking the quote full restoration of bilateral ties.
This marks Wang's first official visit to Korea in almost 5 years and comes ahead of the two countries' 34th anniversary of diplomatic relations, which falls on August 24th.
The ministers agreed to use next year's 35th anniversary to elevate their ties, focusing on services and investment negotiations under the bilateral free trade agreement, supply chain stability, people-to-people and cultural exchanges, bringing pandas to Korea, and preserving Korean independence movement sites in China. According to a foreign ministry official on Thursday, the two sides also agreed to work towards another leaders' meeting when China hosts the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in November. Seoul, Arirang News.
Wall Street has felt some relief as the U.S. Treasury yields eased, following the Treasury Department's move to inject more liquidity into the long-term bond market. For more on this, we invite our Kim Bo-kyung into the studio. Welcome back, Bo-kyung.
Thanks for having me.
Bo-kyung, first things first, the Trump administration had to step in as the bond market sent a warning signal. Now, what did the Treasury Department announce?
Right, so after long-term Treasury yields hit their highest levels in years, the U.S. Treasury said on Wednesday that it will at least double its buybacks of 10 to 30-year treasuries. Each purchase will increase from $2 billion to at least $4 billion temporarily from September 9th through November 4th. Long-term Treasury yields had soared to 19-year highs on Tuesday, with the 30-year yield hitting around 5.33% and the 10-year yield topping 4.7%. Well, after the announcement, the 30-year yield fell as low as 5.18%, while the 10-year yield dropped to 4.63%. This fall led U.S. stocks to close slightly higher on Wednesday, with the Dow up 0.22%, the S&P 500 0.21%, and the Nasdaq 0.16%.
Then, Bo-kyung, what drove the recent surge in the yields?
Right, so the sharp rise in long-term Treasury yields came amid growing concerns over inflation, fueled by prolonged conflicts in the Middle East.
Because the conflict in the Middle East remains at a stalemate and oil prices are going up, there's an expectation that inflation is going to be higher for longer, and that's going to further erode the kind of returns that bond investors are used to getting.
Well, investors are also demanding higher returns amid ballooning government deficits. According to the U.S. Treasury Department on Wednesday, America's total national debt has surpassed $40 trillion for the first time. Well, that's up from $30 trillion in January 2022, less than 5 years ago. And another factor behind the global bond sell-off is the AI investment boom. Major tech companies such as Microsoft and Meta are issuing massive amounts of corporate debt to buy NVIDIA's AI chips and build data centers, competing with government bonds for investor capital.
Well, Bo-kyung, the market has cooled down a bit, but many experts see this as a short-term fix, don't they?
Right. So one expert I spoke with also said that the U.S. Treasury's buyback is not going to be the fundamental solution. Let's take a listen.
There's still a great deal of uncertainty and concern in the market over these bonds. Therefore, unless the U.S. government introduces a bold policy, I believe there will be a limit to how much Treasury yields can come down.
Well, another expert said South Korea's long-term bond yields could also rise as investors keep a close eye on its fiscal deficit and national debt.
Korea's government debt is perhaps lower than other countries, but government deficit is very high, and debt is increasing. So international investors have reasons to be nervous about Korea.
And when it comes to the impact on stocks, the same experts said rising bond yields would normally weigh on the market, but the impact could be limited for now due to the AI boom and strong demand for semiconductors.
For the exchange rates and the stock market, because these demand for Samsung Electronics and Hynix, the semiconductor producers, are just so strong, and they do not seem to be affected by what's happening in the government bond markets. I expect the Kospi numbers, the exchange rates, to not respond that much to what's happening in the government bond markets.
So basically, without semiconductors, the factors we discussed would likely weigh on the Kospi. But with semiconductors in the picture, the market is likely to be driven largely by demand for chip makers. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
Indeed, that is all the questions I have for you, Pyongyang. Thank you for the wrap-up.
Thank you.
Korea's Industry Minister Kim Jong-un said the first Korean investment project in the U.S. will be announced sometime in September. Speaking to the reporters after returning from Washington on Thursday, Kim said he held talks with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and the two sides had resolved many outstanding issues, calling it significant progress. The minister said the first project is likely to focus on energy. Now, he made the trip to Washington as negotiations over the first major investment project reached a critical stage, though several issues still remain unresolved at the working level. Now, the two sides will continue negotiations through a video conference next week. After a lengthy hiatus following the election of the ruling party's new leadership, Korea's assembly returned to full-scale proceedings today, passing a number of bills through a bipartisan agreement. Our National Assembly correspondent An Sung-jin has the details.
The National Assembly passed a bill to shorten the parliamentary fast-track review process for legislation from a maximum of 330 days to just 90 on Thursday. The bill passed with 153 lawmakers voting in favor out of 234 members present. The measure was first put to a vote on July 31st, but after the main opposition People Power Party launched a filibuster, its passage had been delayed. After the filibuster ended with the July extraordinary session closing, it was the first bill to come to a vote at the plenary session for August. The ruling Democratic Party argued that the current fast-track system is an obstacle to speedy legislation and vowed for an efficient system. The opposition continues to criticize the move, accusing the ruling party of unilaterally changing parliamentary rules without allowing sufficient time for deliberation. Alongside this contentious bill, around 70 pieces of legislation were passed and agreed upon by both the ruling and main opposition parties. Some of these bills include amendments to the Urban and Residential Environment Improvement Act, as well as a special act on public housing. Another real estate-related measure, an amendment to the Yongsan Park Special Act, has been postponed until next week pending talks between the land minister and the mayor of Seoul. The PPP says it will support housing and livelihood bills agreed upon by both parties, but opposes this amendment, citing concerns over damage to green space. The DP, on the other hand, suggests that the measure alone would not allow housing to be built on the main park itself, and that additional legal changes would be needed for actual housing development. The amendment would ease park and green space requirements in designated mixed-use development zones, such as the site near a returned U.S. military base in Yongsan-gu District. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump has declared what is calling economic D-Day against Iran, vowing unprecedented sanctions and warning any country that helps Tehran evade them. Kim So-young has the latest.
President Trump says he's launching the most sweeping economic isolation campaign ever waged against a single country, targeting Iran and any nation that helps it. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote that no one had given Iran a greater opportunity to make a deal than him, but tragically, they have failed to take it. He said he's launching what he called economic warfare and isolation on an unprecedented scale. The U.S. president warned that any country allowing its banks, businesses, airports, or government agencies to give Iran what he called a lifeline would itself face tremendous economic consequences. He specifically called out oil smuggling, currency swaps, cash transfers, ship registries, and front companies as tactics that, in his word, need to stop now. Asked whether sanctions on Iran would be impactful this week, Trump said,
"Well, we have things that we could sanction. We have very draconian sanctions, and we'll see what happens."
Iran dismissed the move as a distraction. The country's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi wrote on X on Thursday that so-called economic D-Day is a diversion from America's own crisis, citing unprecedented U.S. debt and surging interest costs. He added that doubling down on failed policies will only bring further defeat, and accused Washington of what he called economic terrorism. Reports point out that China is seen as a key target as it continues buying discounted Iranian oil despite existing sanctions. The UAE has already moved to comply, as President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan announced Tuesday after a call with President Trump that the UAE will halt all trade and financial dealings with Iran. Kim Seoyoung, Arirang News.
The global hunt for critical minerals is ramping up as nations push to break free from dominant Chinese supply chains. Now, amid this push, a Korean tungsten mine is re-emerging as a key global partner. Our Kim Jun-hong takes us there.
Blasting takes place in the dark as geologists and workers move in and out. This is Sangdong Mine in southern Gangwon-do province, one of the world's largest tungsten mines. Some 4.7 kilometers of tunnels lie beneath the site, where there are an estimated 58 million tons of reserves. Tungsten is invisible to the naked eye, but under UV light in the dark, it becomes visible in a distinctive blue. Sangdong had closed its doors amid competition from cheaper Chinese tungsten. But more than 3 decades later, the mine has reopened with full-scale commercial production. Annual output stands at around 2,300 tons, with processing capacity set to double in phases.
Tungsten deposits here have an average grade of about 0.43%. That's about 3 times the global average, which allows for stable production over the long term.
Tungsten is key to industries from defense and semiconductors to aerospace. Demand has surged for high-performance chips, while the U.S.-Iran war has further strained global supplies. Chinese export controls are adding to the squeeze. The country produces around 80% of the world's tungsten, but supplies have fallen sharply since Beijing restricted exports of critical minerals last year, citing national security. Tungsten prices have soared since then. With critical minerals emerging as a new geopolitical weapon, Washington is racing to cut its reliance on China and diversify supplies. That is putting Sangdong in the spotlight as a key source of non-Chinese tungsten, with most of its output contracted for the U.S.
Building a value chain to develop and supply more tungsten is strategically important for Korea amid China's export controls. This would serve as an alternative supply source for our allies. Such cooperation could later act as a bargaining card for Korea to secure critical resources when needed.
For now, Sangdong handles the initial stages of production, including mining and concentrating. Operator Almonte Korea Tungsten plans additional facilities nearby as plans for downstream processing gain pace. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News, 영월.
The heatwave advisory has been lifted across the capital region as showers bring some relief. But heatwave and tropical night advisories will take effect across Chungcheong-do provinces and the southern regions at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Tomorrow, rain will move into the central part of the country from the early morning hours. The northern central part of the country, including Seoul, could see 5 to as much as 60 millimeters of rain. Meanwhile, in the south, the heat will continue tomorrow, along with another round of showers. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 24 degrees, Chuncheon 23 and Busan 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 30 degrees, while the southern regions including Daegu, Gwangju, and Jeju will all soar to 32 degrees. This weekend marks Cheoseol, a traditional seasonal milestone that signals the end of summer heat. But don't expect much Cheoseol magic this year. Temperatures will still climb to around 33 degrees Celsius. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.